Hello everybody! Today I will be sharing to you the tale of Bulgaria in the 1910s, which in that decade it showed the Bulgarian rise from minor power to domination of the entire Balkans. Out of the way, let's begin. Starting on May 1st, 1910, Bulgarian scientists were hard at work gaining various points. I also used consequently to speed things up. To speed things up. We signed troops under a general as we began our industrial focuses. We also hired Guard as our army chief. Tsar Ferdinand would become the first monarch to fight an airplane. As we would reorganize the military into the cavalry base, which would be very helpful in the Balkan Wars. We recruited a few cavalry divisions, as we basically just sent the entirety of our military industry towards guns, and we'd also hire a silent workhorse. Yeah, we would also go for bold attack, as our army and chiefs should be very good at attacking the enemy. The best defense is a good offense. We also signed a treaty of friendship with Serbia, as we would work here on the Grand Fleet from one another. So that we would have a very experienced military right before going into conflicts. And trust me, conflicts will come, even if they took really long to appear. We would also decide on field marshal, which would be Ivan whatever, who would be of great importance in the Third Balkan War. Actually, just first, second, and third. Continuing our industrial focuses, we would get towards railroads. As we would hire a popular figurehead for extra stability, which would be very nice. I will tell you the truth, it took until 1914 for the war to break out, so yeah, I'm just going to be narrating it. Oh yes, and the Agadir crisis was averted, thankfully. I'm sure that will avert a European-wide war. You would begin land distribution in the aim to increase our industrial output. Not via improving our agricultural industry, as we would create Bulgar cav divisions, which would have artillery in them, giving our armies a nice extra punch. We would also get a captain of industry, which would be the last member we would assign to our cabinet, as we would begin the process of enlisting a military theorist and industrial companies, which are, of course, generically named. The Great Qing are about to suppress the Republican revolt until, it just escalates like a cancer. 3, 2, 1, boop! We would become the new Balkan power, as we would begin focusing on reforming our military. We would also get an air company, which we would never use because we never made an air force. would be in a military staff reorganization. And, yeah. You might be wondering if I click on states, there'll be a little icon. Yes, that's because I have a coring mod, but I never used it, so in this playthrough, so you can just ignore it. We would also try to add howitzers to our cavalry, which would be very strong, but unfortunately very scarce until about 1916, so, yeah. Anyways, the Italo-Turkish War would end with an Italian victory in the seizure of Libya, displaying Ottoman weakness. We would also improve doctrines as we would begin focusing on diplomacy, specifically raising the Macedonian question with Serbia. We wanted to make an autonomous state, but that was refused, so we instead explored other options. Which would be some decisions that allowed us to negotiate spheres of influence, which would absolutely hold. No, they wouldn't. With that said, we would begin an artillery research as we would become the Prussia of the Balkans. A moniker that would very soon be put to the test. It would be the calm before the storm as we would prepare for war with the Ottoman Empire. War has broken out, the First Balkan War, as we would begin immediately launching an offensive over the entire front line. Of course, the Ottomans decide to do a last stand, which, while successful at holding off the majority of the Bulgarian advance, sans that breakthrough, they would lose massive amounts of strength, with a few divisions completely being wiped out. As we would advance into the Mediterranean coast, we would capture central Thrace. The Ottomans surrender very easily, with us gaining tracts of land. However, the Macedonian question must be raised. As after all, we have cores on it, and the Serbians, they don't. So obviously it should be rightfully Bulgarian and not from the thieving allies that we know as the Serbians and Greeks. Oh, and the Romanians would also try to get to Prussia, but unfortunately, they never participated in the war, so we rejected them out of hand. With that said, the Second Balkan War has officially begun. Bulgarian troops quickly captured Thessaloniki fully encircling them as Romania joins the war for Dobruja. However, this would be a terrible mistake for them, as we would be able to largely push them to the Danube. And meanwhile, we would make a breakthrough in Greece, however, the Serbian front would stagnate, at least until we get a breach. This breach would be very successful, as we would quickly go around and encircle Belgrade. But the Serbian garrison in the city could not hold out for long, and the Treaty of Nice would be signed, which would grant Bulgaria massive swathes of territory over the Balkans and cement it as the Balkan hegemon. But the Bulgarian rise was only just beginning. There would be about a year of calm before the next war in Bulgaria's history. In that time, we used it to cement Tsar Ferdinand's rule and our Balkan hegemony. Of course, while some in our cabinet were demanding that we should do a safe course, Tsar Ferdinand decided that with our immense military strength, we should disband the National Assembly, which were mainly in favor of that pacifist view, and focus on further expansion. Specifically, into Tsargrad, or the most illustrious Queen of cities, Constantinople, which had been under Ottoman control for over 4 centuries now, and that was about to change. So Ferdinand, gaining army command, would focus on a bold move. You see, the Ottoman defenses in Thrace were very impenetrable, thanks to them having a high concentration of forces on the border, and the said border being incredibly small. The idea was to let Ottoman forces overextend themselves, charging through Bulgarian territory, before launching a counterattack to close the trap, close the bulge that they would inevitably make, and wipe out a majority of the Ottoman army. The Ottomans would while Bulgarian forces would try to push earlier, this would not be able to occur. However, the Ottomans would fall for a trap, hook, line, and sinker. As Bulgarian forces raced down the coast, they would capture Gallipoli, fully sealing off any attempts for the Ottomans to supply, and lead to the encirclement of, I believe, about 60% of the Ottoman army. With this, the Ottoman military is absolutely crippled, as we would launch an assault towards Constantinople itself. Meanwhile, the Ottomans would launch a counteroffensive towards Gallipoli. However, this would be avoided. And the game wiped pieces me for some reason. And I tried doing it again, not understanding, but it seems that if you capture it, and after a certain amount of time, it will white piece you. So instead, I just decided to just make myself the owner of the provinces. With that, so using the console, because I had already pushed them out of the Balkans, destroyed a large amount of their army, I am going to get Constantinople, I swear to God. With the Turks expelled from Europe, Tsar Ferdinand would begin and his ambitions for a new Byzantium, declaring war on northern Epirus, which was simultaneously protected by the Greeks and Albanians. You had to use the council because the war tension was literally at 2% because the World War I had not started yet. The Italians would launch an invasion of Thrace, trying to save their Greek puppet state, of course, but we would immediately deny this. The Greek forces were absolutely destroyed as we would begin feigned retreat, which would lead into the Greek forces overextending themselves and promptly being pushed back. Seizing Athens and the entire Peloponnese, the last Greek holdouts would be in the Aegean Islands and Crete, as we had annexed Albania. Italy was a non-factor in the war, and finally World War I would officially begin. And during that time, and though we were a part of the Central Powers, we decided not to join for now, finishing the war on Crete thanks to Central Power, thanks to the Allied Navy, as Italy had somehow managed to make itself both at war with the Central Powers and at war with the Entente. But regardless, we would proclaim a new Byzantium, gaining control over most of the Balkans. Finally, it was time for Tsar Ferdinand to enter World War I. The Austrians were deadlocked as the entirety of Europe descended into war. We stealthily moved our entire army to the Serbian border, though not without making sure that we would make sure that there would be a garrison of the ports in order to prevent any naval invasions, which was a lesson that the Italians provided for us. Moving up the army, Austria would try and fail to really make any pushes, as they would lose horrifically in Galicia. Crucially, the redaction with leave the Prussia border undefended, as we did not expect Russia to declare war on us. Regardless, in a lightning campaign across Serbia, we would capture the entire country and begin integration of them into the new Byzantium. There would be Italian forces in Illyria, which would be very weird, but regardless, we would push rapidly through Bessarabia. Seeing how lightly defended the front was, Sir Ferdinand gave the order to send the entire army up there, which would lead into the absolute complete collapse of the Russian southern front, as we would blitz through the Ukraine and try linking up with the German forces in Lithuania, effectively creating the most massive encirclement in human history. Romania would enter the war. However, we would finalize the capture. We would move our entire army towards the capture of, most of it, into the destruction of that pocket, as the Romanians would completely collapse thanks to us encircling their main source of industry, their capital, along with manpower. They would capitulate after the capture of Bucharest, which would leave the entire the Byzantine army completely free to wipe out the Russians, which they would suffer about 500,000 casualties to our 80,000. And a lot of those were from Serbia. Arguably, very nice. The Byzantine forces would continue to march through the Ukraine, and continuing encirclements here and there. I believe it is around this time that the April Revolution occurred. Well, the April Revolution occurred thanks to the encirclement, and with the war continuing to deteriorate, the Second Russian Revolution by the Bolsheviks would occur, leading into the complete collapse of Russia and their exit from the war entirely. We would also invade Montenegro during this time, as they were harboring Serbian forces, capturing Montenegro and fully cementing our grip over the Balkans. Finally, we would launch an invasion of Italy, calling the Austrians into the war. We were aiming to open a secondary front in the west. It would go very well, as after some stiff resistance at the river, we would penetrate and would be able to completely sweep through. Somehow they capitulated to France, which would be no issue, though thanks to Entente naval supremacy, we would never be able to advance into Sicily. The British would invade the Peloponnese, as we would redirect some of our forces there to stop them. Thanks to the heroic defense of an Austrian soldier, the British would be completely unable to link up at the crucial port of Athens in order to gain reinforcements. Byzantine forces would try to launch an assault into Piedmont, as we would blitz through the Peloponnese. With the encirclement of most of the French forces within Piedmont occurring simultaneously as the destruction of the British naval invasion, and the Italians would, for some reason, white peace. We're really confused about this. However, part of that was fully turning over the Italians, the Byzantine troops still in their territory, over to the Entente soldiers, which would lead into the destruction of 30 divisions, thanks to this cheap move. We would attempt to break through on the Western Front, as the Germans had done legendarily poorly, failing to even overrun Luxembourg. Advancing into the Bray region, we would attempt to make a dash to Constantinople. However, not Constantinople, Paris. However, this would fail thanks to a lack of supply. I am the forever done, preventing the linking up of our railroads. We would be unable to push any farther and would be forced to pull back. Instead, we would attempt an advance towards and along the Swiss border, wanting to link up with forces, wanting to loop right around and once again overrun Italy, which had fallen to the French. And as it turns out, the Italians had joined the Red Movement. Yes, I'm not even kidding, the Italians joined the Bolsheviks. Regardless, French forces were massively overextended thanks to the capture of Italy, allowing us to easily breeze through Piedmont, just as we had done before, but unfortunately for them, a lucky white piece wouldn't save them this time. We would quickly advance through Savoy, laying siege to the ports of Nice and Marseille. With our linking up with the Swiss border, the remainder of the French forces in Italy were completely trapped. As we would launch an attack all throughout southern France. Unfortunately, however, we would be unable to actually capture Lyon, which would be the main. If we captured it, would be the main. Which would be the main nexus for an attack through central France and their capitulation. So though France had lost its south, it would and literally all of its Mediterranean coast, it would be able to just barely hold on. The front stagnating, so Ferdinand II would leave Austrian forces to garrison the southern front, as we would once more try our hand at breaking through the Alsace region. However, this attempt would be a lot less successful. Though we would receive some early gains, we wouldn't be able to push very far, simply because, again, a lack of supply. By this point, the main Byzantine issue was the complete lack of supply in order to reinforce the Romanians, causing heavy attrition. We would attempt a complete encirclement of the French forces still that made a corridor to Switzerland. However, this would be destroyed. The Australians would continue to launch naval invasions, which would, funnily enough, lead into the Byzantine-Australian rivalry, which would lead into the 1936 World Cup massacre. 1936 Olympic massacre, which saw the massacre of Australian athletes participating in Sofia. Anyways, the French had pulled back so many of their forces as to defend the east from their east side of the country from the German and Byzantine attack, that we were able to use our superior cavalry mobility to rush down to set undefended territory before or even the Americans could respond, which by this point had joined the war. We would capture Paris and the Entente would surrender. While the Entente was hoping that the American entry into the war could change the tide, the Byzantine forces capturing the ports would manage to prevent them. With that said, as the 1910s conclude, Bulgaria has expanded into Byzantium, which has control over literally the entirety of the non-Austrian Balkans. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. If you like this video, you can watch others.